He bore it all that I might
in His presence live. My precious Savior suffered pain and agony. He bore it all that I might live. He broke the bonds of sin and set the captive free.
He bore it all
that I might in His presence live. He bore it all that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all
that
I with Him might live. I stood condemned, He took my place.
He bore it all
that I might in His presence live. They placed a crown of thorns upon my Savior's head. He bore it all that I might live. My cruel man with spear, His side was pierced and bled.
He bore it all
that I might in His presence live. He bore it all that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all
that I might
I with Him might live. I stood condemned, He took my place.
He bore it all
that I might in His presence live. Up Calvary's hill in shame the blessed Savior trod. He bore it all that I might live. Between two thieves they crucified the Son of God.
He bore it all
that I might in His presence live. He bore it all that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all
that I might
I with Him might live. I stood condemned, He took my place.
He bore it all
that I might in His presence live. He bore it all that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all
that
I with Him might live. I stood condemned, but Jesus took my place.
He bore it all that I might live.
In His presence live.
Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away,
got to fly away
to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll
fly away,
fly away,
got to fly away.
Oh,
I'll fly
fly away,
got to fly
oh
away.
glory,
I'll fly
away,
got to fly away.
When I die, hallelujah,
Oh,
by and by, I'll fly away,
got to fly away.
Just a few more weary days and then, whoa, I'll fly away,
got to fly away.
to a land where joy shall not end.
I'll
fly away,
got to fly away.
yes,
I'll fly away,
fly away,
got to fly
oh
away.
glory,
I'll fly away,
fly away,
got to fly away.
I said when
I
die, hallelujah,
Oh, hallelujah, by and by.
I'll fly away,
Got to fly away.
oh, I'll fly away, oh glory,
I'll fly away,
fly away,
got to fly away.
yes, and when
I
die, hallelujah,
Oh, hallelujah, by and by.
I'll fly away,
Got to fly away. Fly away.
Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you worry there's a victory to win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be free from your passion and your pride? Power in the blood, power in the blood. Come for a cleansing to Calvary's tide. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, thanks for joining us, either right now live or if you're watching us later at some other future date. Either one's fine. We appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us this morning. This is S.A.L.T. Live, seeking a living truth. And currently we are in beautiful Lincoln, Nebraska. I say beautiful, beautiful being a relative term as to your interpretation or perspective on the weather outside. Speaking of weather, as I so often do at this point, I bring Miranda up, who has more to say about weather than I do, because she checks it more than I do. So we're going to bring Miranda up over in Studio B, or 2, I guess. Miranda, how's the weather over in Studio 2?
You know, I think it's really close to the weather that's over there in Studio 1.
Is it very similar weather we're having over here, huh?
It is,
Yeah.
It might be a little warmer because I have a fire going over here, but...
Yes, we have a fire today. More on that later. We are going to do something with fire, which is always fun. Yes. Today it feels humid.
It does feel humid, but it has cooled down. Oh, let's see, the West Coast is getting some really hot weather now. But our hot weather has cooled down a bit. It's very fortunate because we planned a picnic for today.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that, as I have Aspen check the audio. We always try and check the audio and video at the top of the broadcast to make sure our sound and everything is going, because you never know with these AV details and mechanics that can go wrong on any given moment. But when she gives us the thumbs up, as she just did, everything's good. So if you experience any problems, let us know. We try to fix them on the fly as we can. But yeah, where are we going today after the broadcast, Miranda?
Oh, let's see. Apparently there's an African safari right between Lincoln and Omaha, Nebraska. And some friends invited us to go with them today and kind of hike around there and take a look at the animals, and we'll have a picnic lunch.
Yeah, that's if the weather cooperates.
Doesn't rain on us, yes. But they keep changing the forecast every couple hours, you know.
As they do in Nebraska.
Yeah. Check it in the morning, it's going to be pouring rain. If you check it in the afternoon, they've changed it and it won't be.
Yeah.
So we're counting on the current forecast.
This is true. Hey, when you were a kid, did you ever watch Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom?
Oh, yes, I remember that.
I'm wondering if the thing we're going to today is associated with them at all, because that was Omaha, you know, the insurance company based in Omaha, Mutual of Omaha, and they did, you know, if you're not familiar with it, it was kind of the first, I guess you'd call it Nature Channel or, you know, Wild Channel, Disney Wild, all those came after this, but an insurance company did a TV show, and they had a, you know, safari guy, animal expert, I guess, and they would, you know, bring in these animals and do stuff with them. And I wonder if they're connected with them.
I don't know. It could be interesting to find out.
Yeah, if you go to like the Omaha Zoo, there's a lot of plaques and stuff that mention Mutual of Omaha. They had a lot of money poured into the zoo, even a little bit here in Lincoln. But it'll be interesting because I think maybe that has something to do with that TV show when we were kids.
Yeah.
We can contemplate that as we munch on, what are we having?
Ooh, we're going to have some, of course, veggie hot dogs, Big Franks, potato salad, deviled eggs, some Kalamata olive bread, and chips, of course, and sparkling apple cider. And then dessert, we're going to have some, hopefully still warm, brownies with some real whipped cream and some raspberries. Fresh raspberries, of course.
Sadly, Miranda will not be having brownies.
No, but I'm making myself some cookies.
Miranda is happily having new cookies she found. Double chocolate chip cookies. I mention this because it's hard to find things to eat sometimes for people like Miranda who have stuff, you know, they can and can't eat because it wreaks havoc with their digestive and their system. And a lot of times it's frustrating because you can find something and then they'll change it on you, you know, after they've sold you on it for a year or two, and then they change the recipe and all of a sudden you can't eat it anymore. That happens to Miranda a lot.
Yes. Or the local bakery, which I was absolutely in love with, changed their recipe as well. And so I'm very sad.
Yeah, it's very sad. But we found Miranda found new chocolate chip double chocolate cookies to try.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Which did not come from, by the way, the Great Adventist Swap Facebook page, but that does have a lot of stuff. I don't think we're having anything from that today, but they do have a lot of stuff on there.
Yeah.
So if you're an Adventist or a health cook person and want to find some pretty renowned recipes, especially I think it got originally started by people trying to find how to make things from their childhood when they went to either boarding school or college, and like, oh, we used to have this at college, and people are finding like, yes, I used to actually make that in the cafeteria, and this is the recipe we use, and they're finding all these really cool recipes from their, early school days that they ate in the cafeteria and found something they liked.
Yes, and the beauty of all these old Adventist recipes is that it's a one-pot mixture. Like you just put it in the bowl, stir it up, and either fry it into patties or put it in a loaf pan, and you're done. There's no all this, some recipes you gotta saute this and oh my goodness, all this kind of stuff before your thing gets done.
Yeah.
But this is great. It all goes in one thing. Mix it up, put it in the pan, and you're done.
You're done.
Yes.
Which reminded me of my my days at Pisgah, and if anybody at Pisgah is watching or watches later, you were there during my time, you might remember this. It was called, on Fridays, we had So-Song Surprise. Miss So-Song was the cafeteria director, and because you're speaking of throwing everything into a bowl, that's what she did. She would take most of the leftovers from the week and throw it into a bowl, mix it up, bake it, put lots of cheese on top, and then, bake it and then serve it. And you never knew what it was because it was covered in cheese on top, which I guess makes everything better. And we used to hold contest cafeteria of, take one bite of So-Song Surprise and see if you could figure out what all was in it. And we used to give prizes and things away, like if you got it, you got something from McDonald's that, you actually could eat. So it was pretty fun times there in boarding school at Mount Pisgah Academy. So-Song Surprise every Friday. Anyway.
She was thrifty.
She was very thrifty.
She wasn't by chance German, was she?
She was very German, yes.
Are you serious?
Yeah, she was
Oh my goodness.
pure German. I think her and her husband both came from Germany. They were at Pisgah for I don't know how long, a long time. But yeah, we had a lot of potatoes. It was the first time I'd ever seen potato pancakes. Yeah, she was German. Yeah.
Well, I like her already.
Yeah.
Just a one-pot meal and you're set.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
She didn't have to measure that. I
Nope.
mean, just throw that stuff together, put cheese on it, and you're done.
Yep.
I hate to say it, my meals don't generally turn out quite like that.
No. Boy, that could have been a cooking show before we had cooking shows. That would have been great. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, moving on. Today, we are talking about some a couple of different topics. So we've got the main talk today is going to be kind of, I said in the post, I said living small in the big picture. So we're going to talk about, living God's will and what it looks like to, live day by day. And is that living small or is that actually living large? And what's the difference? We're going to do some fun things with fire. Aspen's going to devolve into the world of chaos theory. And we're going to start our first series off here with the mustard seed stories. This one kind of relates with us, what we're talking about today. Miranda talking about a little bit of an experience where I was with her, but I was more of a rider, not a participator. But telling a story about, following God's plan and finding out how to live and drive in the moment. So, Mustard Seed Stories, with Miranda telling a story, The Exit.
That's great. It's not there.
It's not there.
No.
Oh. Apparently that one's not there. So, instead, we're going to go over to Aspen's object lesson, and it's going to be
Did you want me to just tell
the
the story?
chaos theory.
Today, we're talking about chaos!
of the butterfly effect? The theory is that a butterfly can flap its wings all the way in Japan, and that effect can come all the way and create a tornado in Kansas, which whisks away Dorothy and Toto to Oz! The butterfly effect is a very important part of what we're talking about today. The chaos theory. One morning in 1961, a meteorology professor at MIT named Edward Lorenz was running some weather tests on a computer. Meteorologists are scientists who study weather, so this was a pretty normal morning for him. When Lorenz fed some weather conditions into his computer program, like such and such temperature and so humidity, his computer would make a graph that told him how the weather would turn out. It wasn't always right, but it was close enough to make models of sunny days and spotted showers. This particular morning, Lorenz was rerunning a test that he'd been trying out for a few days. He put in his numbers, saw his computer program start, then went out to get a cup of coffee. He had a pretty good idea on how it was going to go. But when he came back, something really strange had happened. The computer had made a graph that was wildly different than all the other ones. Lorenz looked at the numbers he put in and saw something. In his other tests, he'd used the number 0.506127. In this morning's test, he'd used 0.506. He'd rounded the number because those extra decimal places didn't seem too important. Simply put, the difference in those numbers is like taking a few raindrops out of a thunderstorm. Just because you're missing a few raindrops, you should still get a thunderstorm. But somehow, those two missing raindrops turned a would-be thunderstorm into a drizzle. This shocking result led Lorenz to come up with the chaos theory, one of the most important scientific ideas of the 20th century. So scientists realized that things that they used to think were completely random were actually chaotic, which means they're very complex, sometimes too complex to always predict. But they all have patterns that can be understood, all thanks to chaos theory. There's things in life that show predictable patterns, and there's things in life that show complex, chaotic patterns. You may have even ridden one or two. Have you ever ridden a roller coaster? Those are engineered to give the same ride every time. How about a Ferris wheel? It goes round and round and round, and pretty much gives the same ride every time as well. But have you ever been in bumper cars? Or a tilt-a-whirl? Or the crazy dizzy machine called the zipper? All of those rides have so many variables that each ride is very different every time. So see, you can find chaos at the carnival. But since we can't build a tilt wheel or bumper cars, we built this! It's a double pendulum, and it's going to show us an example of chaos theory. So how can chaos theory relate to our life? Basically, there's lots of things that happen in life, and some are good, and some are not so good. Bible that covers it all. All things work together for good for those who love God. So whatever happened yesterday, whatever's happening today, or whatever's happening tomorrow, whether it's boring and predictable, or it's chaos, we can relax because God's got it covered.
Hey, so, yeah, like I say, life can always be fun and exciting. You never know what's going to happen. So, yeah, I got distracted this morning. Normally I download all the videos and get it ready, but I got distracted by reading Miranda's actual really good thoughts she had for this morning. I went through it and it always makes me think things. And so I'm sitting there like, oh, this would be good. Oh, this would be good. And I totally forgot to download the second video for this morning. So it was a good distraction, but we're going to talk about those really cool things here in a little bit because they really were so practical. I was thinking, this is like for everybody. This is, I wish I'd have known these things when I was younger. My life would have been easier maybe because, the experiences that we have along the way and the things that we learn along the way, which is what we're going to talk about now because we didn't get the video, but lucky for us, it's actually stories that happen to us, so we can do the story live and tell it to you right here from Studio B. So I'm going to kick it over to Miranda. She's going to tell you that story that we're going to show you the video for, but it's an experience that she actually had. I was with her in the car. Aspen was with her in the car, but it was really Miranda's story to tell. So kick it over to Studio 2, Miranda telling her story on the mustard seed story, The Exit.
Okay, so Brett and I, we were down in Tennessee, and we were going to drive from Chattanooga to Nashville. Well, how far is that, Brett?
Chattanooga to Nashville is about an hour and a half.
Oh, okay. Well, Brett had some meetings over in Nashville he needed to go to, and he had a little bit of paperwork that he wanted to finish up before we got over there. And so I was going to drive, and he was going to finish up his paperwork, and I figured probably take a nap too, right? So I had him put the address in the GPS in case he fell asleep. That way I wouldn't go zipping right past the exit and, have to turn around and such like that. So we're driving along, and yes, Brett finished his paperwork, and he took a nap, and then the GPS talked to me. It said, exit right, keep left. Exit right, keep left, because you know how those GPSs are. So I get to the exit, and I exit right, and I keep left because there's at least 3 lanes. There's one that turns to the right, one that turns to the left, and one that went straight. Well, I could see the hotel that we were going to was directly across the street from the stoplight, and I thought, well, it said keep left, and so I'll get in the left turn lane. So it was a fairly busy exit. There was any number of cars already waiting at the stoplight, and so I came to a stop behind some vehicles, and next to me on the right was a semi-truck. And as I sat there now, not moving and just perusing what was around me, I noticed that if I wanted to get to the hotel, I needed to go straight and not make a left. And I looked around at all of the traffic and other cars around me. I said, no, I am not going to sit here and put on my blinker and wait for somebody to kindly let me in and hold up traffic. It really isn't going to take any extra time to go left, do a U-turn, and come back. But here's the crazy part. I don't know why I think thoughts like I think sometimes, but I said, but you know what, God? It would be a lot more convenient if a space just opened up here to the right that I could pull over into that lane. So I'm not going to turn on my blinker or anything, but if you would like to just create this empty spot over there, which is highly unlikely because of all the traffic, that would be great. And so eventually the light turns green, and the traffic ahead of me starts pulling ahead, and I noticed, but it hadn't gotten where I needed to pull forward yet. And so I noticed all of a sudden that the semi-truck next to me had pulled away, and the cars were not moving past me. And so I looked over there, and for whatever reason, there was this big empty spot, and behind the semi, where the semi truck had been, the car was just sitting there, holding up traffic. I don't know if they were on their phone or something like that, but I couldn't believe it. And I said to Brett, I said, "Hey, Brett," I said, "can I get over?" What a silly question, right? And he's like, "Yes, hurry up." So I went ahead, turned on my blinker, of course, and got in the lane and drove straight across to the hotel.
She uses blinkers.
And they are unnecessary.
That ain't anybody's business where I'm headed.
It's equipment, and it's the law that you use your blinkers.
It's my own business where I'm going.
It's polite to
It
use
is
your
polite.
blinkers.
I know.
But anyways, so I was like so excited at that very moment, and I still am when I think about it. It was so exciting. Why? Why that very moment? And you know that you had nothing to do with it. You could not have made that happen ever. You couldn't make it happen yourself. And it just happened, and I had just asked God to do that. And so it was one of those fun little moments that just really built my faith, because I think maybe it had been about, I don't know, let's say about 6 months before, maybe, if that I had prayed the prayer asking God to increase my faith.
Mm-hmm.
And he started out with these fun ways. We usually think of God's building our faith as unfun experiences, and yet he started out with these fun little experiences. And yeah,
Mm-hmm. And that was the video we were going to do. It's a good video. It's actually, we actually did it driving in the car and so forth. If you've watched us on a semi-regular basis, you've probably seen it because we've shown it, I know, at least once. But we'll use it again some other time. It's a fun video because Miranda's driving in the car while she's telling the story, and I'm videoing the whole thing. And it was almost like, it was kind of cool driving in the car while you're telling a story about driving in the car. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, and Brett picked this video for a reason, because it illustrated what we're talking about today,
Mm-hmm.
which is you can't always see the bigger picture.
Yeah, again, I thought it would be a catchy line, living small in the big picture. And that's kind of, the story kind of illustrated that. You can only see what's in front of you, and you can't, even really see much beyond that. And so, Miranda prays a prayer, and it's right in the moment, and the big picture, God does these things along the way, but there's a bigger plan involved. And, it's really, that's the story perspective of life. We see where we're at in the moment, and God sees the big picture. But the paradox is, as we live that moment to moment, one day at a time kind of thing, that really is living in a bigger world. It's right. When we try and manage things ourselves, we become a very small world.
Right. It's like each piece of the puzzle
Mm-hmm.
is part of the bigger picture.
Part of the bigger picture.
And yeah, sometimes we just get focused on that little piece.
Yeah.
And all by itself, it's not doing you much good when that's all that you focus on.
Yes.
If you're not willing to give up that piece and let God put it in where He's already pre-designed for it to be, then us holding on to it and just looking at it and focusing on it and such is not doing us a whole lot of good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well, like when I was growing up, I can't remember how old I was. It must have been 11 or so, but my dad had bought some BB guns for me and my brother Craig. And they were identical. They were same BB guns. And there was a rule about, you don't. It was really just for target practicing. This is South Carolina, and we lived out in the country, so yeah, it was. And that's what I did, and I wasn't a big gun person. I think he got a 2-for-1 deal or something, but I would go out and I would set up pine cones, I think, and that's what I would, boom, boom, boom. And boy, I remember one day came in and Dad was just furious. Apparently, there was a BB-sized hole in the windshield of one of the cars in a truck of one of the workers that was, helping to build our house. Because at the moment, we were living in a trailer, and Dad was constructing, he had bought this property and was building a house for us. And one of the construction workers got in his truck, and he saw a BB-sized hole, So apparently somebody shot a BB through his windshield. And, oh, man, Dad was mad. And I testified over and over to my innocence. Like, I haven't even touched my gun. I like last time was days ago, and I only ever shoot at pint, and I think Craig eventually admitted it was him. He had, I don't know if it's true or not, so Craig, if you're old enough now to admit the truth, you said back in the day that you were carrying it and it was pointed down and it fired and hit a rock and bounced off the rock and went into the windshield.
Could have
happened. But, anyway, Dad was furious and he was like, "Where's your gun?" And, Craig said, "Right there." And he took the gun and he mashed it and broke it in half over his knee. Well, it was my gun. Craig lied and said my gun was his gun. And so Dad broke my gun instead of Craig's. And to this day, has never admitted the truth of it. And it was my gun that got broke.
The point is, have you forgiven him? Because that's what we're talking about today.
Yes. I have let it go.
That's a bigger picture.
I have put it behind me.
Okay.
You freaking better call and tell the truth. Sorry.
Okay. So
anyway, we're talking about letting things go like that.
Yes. Letting
Clearly
go.
I have. Forgiving him.
Yes. God, in the forgiveness, has a much bigger picture that gets revealed to us after we've actually forgiven someone. Which, going on to the Rap for Aspen's chaos theory video, I found it interesting. Those 3 little numbers that he left off the end made such a difference between the downpour and just a few raindrops being predicted. So basically, we oftentimes think we'll just focus on those big things or the things that maybe other people can see us doing, and then we forget or don't want to deal with the things that are seemingly small. And yet those seemingly small things clearly make such a huge difference in not only our lives, but other people's lives, and even in the weather forecast. And it just, who would want to set aside the little things that are going to, in the end, give us a larger pouring out of the Holy Spirit, as in the thunderstorm, versus a few small raindrops? So, anyways, it's the importance of those small things, of the everyday things, little everyday things that we seem to think don't really matter. But in the end, the bigger picture is, like, if we did those things, now, God, we can see the bigger picture that God has for us.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's not what you had for it.
Well, no, I was going into what we were talking about. You circled back to Aspen's thing.
Oh, right. I thought we were going back to that.
No.
Oh, okay.
Apparently we are. So, yes.
Since we did, we are.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, I was good video that she did about the chaos theory, and I've never understood the chaos theory, and it was interesting to read about it and find out how it started and everything. And so probably many people's only interaction with chaos theory, it was introduced in Jurassic Park, the first movie, where one of the characters was talking about chaos theory, and that was his thing. And a lot of mainstream America, that's where we first heard of chaos theory, was the movie Jurassic Park.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry. My brain just clicked as to why you just told that other story.
That's all right.
So, anyways, yeah, today we're talking about one more section of the Lord's Prayer that is clearly a very important part.
Good. I'm going to go ahead and start the fire thing.
Okay. Because Jesus, at the end of the Lord's Prayer, went back and restated that one more time and elaborated on it. And that is the part that says, "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us." And then after he finishes the Lord's Prayer, he goes on to say, if you can't forgive those who sinned against you, then your Father in heaven is not going to forgive you. And that is big. It is a big thing that we can't just set aside, because Well, one, it's hard. I think he reiterated that because he knew how hard it would be for us to forgive those who have sinned against us. That person who did something horrible, awful, and mean to us, and there is no way that that person deserves our forgiveness. And so Jesus made sure and went back to that one more time. So...
And don't forget the story of the unforgiving servant.
Right, the story of the unforgiving servant.
Yeah, it's again, forgive as you've been forgiven, and the whole point being you were forgiven much and you didn't forgive this little bit, and you know.
Yeah, and his world at the beginning became so much bigger. When the king forgave him, his world, he was free. And yet when he chose not to forgive the man that owed him a little tiny bit of money, now he was thrown into prison. And so that
his world became so much smaller.
Yeah, his world definitely became smaller when he didn't live out those seemingly little things in his life. It made a big difference for him. And so today we're going to use the story of Joseph, the Golden Rule, and the Greatest Commandment to illustrate and look a little bit more deeply at the phrase of the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And so now in the story of Joseph, his very own brothers sold him into slavery. And yet when they show up years later needing food for their own personal survival, for the survival of their families, now he is more than generous. And he says, what he says is, in Genesis 45:5, he says, but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me here before you to preserve life. And so see, Joseph did not focus on the horrible, awful things that his brother did. All of those years that he spent in slavery, in prison, in Egypt, he
focused on God's promise, those dreams,
yes,
and the big, like what God would do.
Yes, and he lived a faithful, loving relationship with God all of that time. So he focused on God rather than what his brothers had done to him, and that created this whole big world for him.
And he was human. He had moments of, why is this happening to me? But instead always chose to, but I will choose to.
Yeah, he didn't live out what would be considered the smallness of being a slave. He didn't try to make himself, he didn't politically go out there and try to, when Potiphar's wife wanted to sleep with him, he's like, no, he could have made a real political alliance there and made his life seemingly better. He chose not to do that. He just lived out his loving, faithful relationship with God. And so
he chose to focus on that instead of the wrongs done to him and how to get revenge.
Yes. And where you look guides your journey, basically.
And that's what kind of the point we're making is that Joseph chose to, instead of focusing on the wrongs that he was done to him and the unfairness of it all and whatever, and how am I going to get revenge? How am I going to get what I deserve? Whatever. Instead of focusing on that, which would have guided his life in a very different path, he focused on the relationship with God, trusting God. God gave him those visions when he was just a boy that guided him through his life, that I will focus on serving God and doing the best and being the best I can be in whatever situation I'm in. And that instead was the guiding rudder of his life. The way he focused on that led him in one path, whereas he focused on one day I'll get revenge on her, that would have focused his life in a very different path. So and where you look,
a very narrow path. By the way, that's a very narrow path when we focus on that. And that's when God gave him those dreams, and also when he was in prison. Those two guys, the butler and the baker, came to him, and he interpreted those dreams for him. And that was God showing him the bigger picture as well. And when he interpreted the dreams for Pharaoh, God was showing him the bigger picture. And yes.
So by what he focused on, guided his life into a bigger world.
Yes, and you were going to share a story, Walking with a Limp?
It's a hiker's guide. Like if you ever get lost in you're hiking somewhere and you get lost in the wilderness, that, if you're right-handed or left-handed, we tend to favor one side or the other, and also if we happen to be injured and we walk with a limp, it tends to, we tend to favor that particular direction. And so people end up walking around in circles because they don't take into account either their bias towards being right or left-handed, so they tend to go to the right or the left. Or if they're injured, they will tend to go that direction because they're leaning on that, that side that's injured. And in the spiritual, emotional sense, you have the same thing. If you're going through life with a emotional or spiritual injury, we tend to, lean in that direction, i.e., like Joseph, someone wronged me, my brothers wronged me. If I'm injured in that and I focus on that injury and revenge, I will lean towards that kind of a life, seeking revenge and focusing on the unfairness of things. And you end up walking around in circles, and
Right.
you really don't grow or gain. You're constantly stuck in that smallness.
Right. And not in just one thing. You focus on it one time and you continue focusing on it. It becomes like this, what's that? Where the
It wears down a pattern.
well, yeah, but it's like out in the water and it circles down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the drain. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it does. It just gets deeper and deeper.
Yeah. And so in the story of Joseph, he lived by the power of God. He had to make those choices that he did as a slave and as a prisoner to still remain faithful to God. And so he used God's power to be able to forgive his brothers. And when we do that, God opens our eyes to the bigger, more beautiful picture of his plan. And that, of course, is unique to every situation. We don't know how that's going to look in our own personal situations when we have that opportunity to forgive someone. But when we do, wow, then we can see the beauty of God's plan in that. So,
I'm going to use my power right now
right now, okay.
to direct Aspen to put some more wood, because the wood I put on burns very, very fast.
Very quickly.
So Aspen's
Yeah.
going. We're getting the fire ready for our hopefully fun illustration.
Yes, hopefully fun.
Yeah, we haven't tested it
yeah,
yet.
it sounds like a good idea, but yes, an untested.
Untested fun
Untested,
experiment.
yes.
It was actually Miranda's. I think it was your idea.
Ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, well, you'll see as we get further in how the golden rule plays into the fire and such
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
So that's Joseph, and now moving on to the golden rule and the greatest commandment.
Yeah.
And how that relates to forgiveness. So for starters, Joseph lived out the golden rule. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but the golden rule, Jesus didn't say anything about that till Matthew.
Yeah.
Matthew.
And that's one of those things where Jesus put it into words. There's some things we think, like, whoa, wasn't Jesus clever the way he summed this up and put this, like one instance is, if you're not real familiar with, the whole Bible study, people get where the lawyer asks Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, love God with all your heart, neighbor yourself. The second is or love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And even as a kid, growing up for years, I thought, oh, that should have been it that way the whole time. Turns out it was that Jesus was actually quoting Deuteronomy, and he wasn't making it up on the spot. He was actually quoting something, which then actually gives you more insight into the story. He was telling the lawyer something the lawyer clearly already knew or should have known, probably already did know. So he was answering the lawyer with something that the lawyer really already knew the answer to. And so it kind of makes you wonder the expression on his face when he said it, like a little smile, like, well, it's this, don't you know, because it was always there. And the golden rule is one of those things. It was always there in practice and implication. Again, Jesus would say it, and it's something that the people probably had heard before or knew, but in the New Testament he puts it into words. But its practice is throughout the Old Testament. So like as Joseph was practicing the golden rule, even though they may not have had it in the words Jesus said, it was something that was already there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so basically, we're going to draw an analogy between the golden rule and the greatest commandment, because basically they are one and the same. They're just in different words, that's all.
Yeah.
And so the golden rule, Matthew 7:12 there says, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them to do for you, for this sums up the law and the prophets."
Mm-hmm.
And that's the Old Testament, basically. It sums up the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And so now, when you go to the greatest commandment, of course, love Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. There you go again. He ends it right there with all the law and prophets hangs on here. So basically, love your neighbor as yourself and treating others as you would like to be treated are one and the same. You're just saying it with different words.
Yeah, and Jesus was saying, in essence, everything, that God has told you, everything that God has commanded, everything that God has been doing so far are about these two things. And he says, it all comes down to these two. You do these two things and you're covering everything.
Yeah. Yeah, so the thing is, though, we often get so bogged down in our inability to forgive someone. And I think we've probably all been there at that place where we know we should forgive them, we hope we've forgiven them, we try to forgive them, and yet we still feel this thing against them. And so we hope we forgive them because mentally we've assented that it's a good thing and we want to, but it never really seems to go away. It's still kind of there, like, So where do we get the power to really live like Joseph did? Because when his brothers showed up, oh my goodness, he was really so happy and thrilled and excited to see them, and so happy that he could help them. And super excited, of course, to see his father again.
Yeah.
And his younger brother. But so he held absolutely nothing against them. They came to Egypt and lived in the best part of the land and such. So there was no holding back really on his part for his brothers who had treated him so horribly. And yet he recognized that as part of the bigger plan. We've talked about that, the path of righteousness being the place where God disciplines us. And what a place of deep discipline for Joseph. But wow, he came out on the other side seeing the bigger picture. And that power was drawn from God himself. Because he lived out the loving actions of God in his daily, everyday life as a slave and as a prisoner. And that's where that power comes from, is actually living out the words of God, not just knowing them in our heads, but having them be a part of our actual heart and who we are. And so...
And that was real humility, too, on Joseph's part. He came from... a family that he was sold into slavery. He was a slave. He was in prison. And then he was the, second in command in Egypt. I mean, I think the, experience of being a slave and being in prison and the stuff that he'd gone through made him a great leader because of the humility. He's like, I'm second in command in Egypt, but I was a slave as well. And we're all equal.
Yes.
Life can turn on any of us at any moment. And it doesn't matter if you're a slave in prison or leading Egypt, we're all people. And that's a real humility, especially at the end to be able to see that, the only reason I'm here is that God has brought me here to be able to save my people, which even that, for him, he had two pictures here. One, he was saving his family. But two, being Jewish and being, from the family he was from, he knew there was this bigger picture of the promise of Abraham and everything going on, that he was a part of God's bigger plan of creating this great nation, that he had promised, to do through Abraham. And that was not lost on him. We sometimes tend to forget that, Joseph would have very well been taught the what would have been in the Bible at his time, but also the stories. He would have very well known. There was a prophecy of people being, God's people being enslaved and then being freed after, hundreds of years, and very well could have had in his head, this is part of that. I'm this little piece to this much bigger story. So in his one sense, his small world, I'm saving my family. In the bigger picture, it's like, I'm just where God put me to be this part of his story of the process in the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, as I was reading that story in the Bible this morning, before Jacob went to Egypt, God gave him a dream and told him that I'm taking you to Egypt, and basically you're going to die there, but then later I'm going to take all of your descendants out of Egypt. So basically he's telling him, I'm taking you there, I'm taking your family there, but then you know what, I'm going to take them out of there as well. Yeah. And that's how God does things. He takes
them
us
to
places,
preserve them and then deliver them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we're touching a little bit on the power of God to be able to forgive, but let's go a little bit further with that. A couple weeks ago we talked about the story of the woman at the well and how Jesus told her, I have the water that if you drink it, you'll never get thirsty again. Yeah. Well, of course, the water is compared to the Holy Spirit. And when we're filled up with the Holy Spirit, we have the power of God at work within us. And it is interesting to note that this water of the Holy Spirit absolutely sets us on fire for God. And it's also interesting to note that a lot of fires have this golden glow about them, right? Mm-hmm. And what makes that golden glow is the sodium. And sodium, of course, is salt. And we are to be the salt of the earth. Salt, of course, is love. We're to season our world around us with the love of God. And see, the love of God, there is nothing more powerful than you can fight any battle with than the love of God, because it preserves life, it preserves relationships, and it always wins, even though sometimes at the moment we may question that. There is a bigger picture that we don't know about and can't see at that very moment. And so a lot of times we choose not to forgive because we can't see the bigger picture until we actually forgive, and then God shows us what it is at the a personal story for us.
Yeah, and again, you just said forgiveness again, and just the big thing with Joseph was, when the brothers came, and they would have felt horrible, and oh, please forgive us, in Joseph's mind was forgiving you is nothing. There's this huge stuff going on, and God's saving our people by bringing you here, and he's made me, the one to start this journey, Forgiving you, yeah, that's actually a very small thing compared to what's going on here.
Yes.
So for Joseph to be able to see the big picture, forgiving someone for selling him into slavery in Egypt was like, yeah, of course, yeah, don't even think about it.
Yeah.
This is what's important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
then
true.
His being wronged was nothing compared to what God was doing.
It's true, because that's the whole greatest commandment thing, those two parts. Love God, and then next comes love your neighbor. Yeah, why wouldn't I love my neighbor when I've got this big thing right here that I'm just so in love with God that, yeah, of course I can forgive you, of course I can, because why wouldn't I? Because my relationship with God is like the fire, and it's a golden fire with that glow, and most people enjoy fire. It's warmth and it's ambiance and such. So I think we're going to do hopefully our fire experiment.
All right, so I'll grab the camera. And Aspen, which part do you want to do, the camera or pouring on the fire?
I don't know. How do you pour it on the fire?
Oh, is this the one that we're using right now? Okay, so there's the golden fire right there. And this is going to be a little jerky as I take the camera off.
There is definitely plenty of sodium.
There's plenty of sodium going on in this fire.
Yes. Because fires can be different colors.
Yes, and if any of you are science people, you're going, well, it's the temperature and stuff. Yes, I know. It's different colors for different temperatures as well, but it's also different temperatures or different, temperature too, and color for different salts and things that burn in the fire. So we're going to open a packet of, we're not sure what, because they threw them all three into the same box. Could be copper sulfate, could be magnesium sulfate. We'll find out. So Aspen is now opening the packet.
Right, and
It's blue. And as you see the golden thing,
so pour it on the front, Aspen.
yeah, pour it on the front. We'll see what happens.
Ooh, it's pretty.
And you see as she pours it on the front and it catches flame, it will turn a little bit blue.
I think we probably were able to see more blue than on the camera, maybe.
A little bit.
A little.
So Aspen turned the log over or into the fire so it's actually burning. And you turned it the wrong way.
Oh, there.
So you can see as it catches fire, it's burning blue. There you go.
And blue is a very peaceful color. When we live out the love of God, it's a peaceful, peaceful place to be. And it's also when we forgive people, that creates a real peace in our lives as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. This is blue, I think, is going to be the copper sulfate. Yeah. I'm guessing, but I think that's it. So, yeah, there you go. It's a nice blue color. We will now take the phone away from the fire as it gets hot.
Are we done with the fire experiment?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, okay. So you want me to move on with what we're talking about then? Okay. So I'm going to compare. We're going to talk about the fire and the wood, basically. And let's say that we are the wood. And now the wood without the fire is nice. And we can stockpile it. And in our barn, so to speak, getting more and more of it because it makes us feel safe. And you know, when we get more and more of ourselves, it makes us feel safe, right? If we could just be bigger people, have more stuff, there's a safety feeling in that. And because fire, and we're using this as an analogy, provides for us, it cooks and it heats our food, but stockpiling it for our own safety never really makes us feel safe, does it? Well, anyway, so wood, then you use it to burn the fire. So, but stockpiling more of us, being selfish, which is not the golden rule, doesn't make us feel safe, because one barn full of wood isn't quite enough to make me feel safe. So we feel maybe 2 barnfuls will be, but it won't. When I live for myself, much like the priest and Levite, for example, we're jumping just a little bit onto a different story, but the priest and Levite who passed by that injured man, they kept themselves safe, but there was no glow about their actions, was there? In fact, as you read that, and you just kind of, it's cringeworthy to hear that story, until, of course, you get to the Good Samaritan part. But we cringe also because these were religious leaders who did that. And yeah, so basically wood that's not set on fire is entirely different than wood that is set on fire. Wood that's not set on fire is hard and cold, and given enough time, it'll just plain rot. But how about the wood that gets set on fire? It changes. It changes, just like we get changed when we drink that water of the Holy Spirit. And so, yeah, just like sodium turns the fire a golden glow like that, we can look at the fire, any fire now, and see the salt of the earth, and how we are to be the salt of the earth, and how we are to spread that salt of love. And then our lives too will have that golden glow, because that's what living out the golden rule does for it. It makes God's words come alive and His power come alive in our lives, and it changes us. And so drinking that living water has a power to set us on fire. And yes. I thought you had a wrap.
Well, I was waiting till you're done with the fire thing, because
Okay.
that's what the SALT, Seeking Living Truth, is about, practical ways of living, God's love out every single day. Simple, practical things. And Jesus, told parables and used simple, common, everyday things to, tie his eternal truths to. And that's kind of what we were doing with the fire, is like, when you see a fire now, let it remind us that, oh, that's me. That's, the salt of the earth. That's me, loving my neighbor, loving God. That's me, being part of, God's bigger picture, big plan for me, and and the big plan he has for my life that, again, he promised in several places, but in the Psalms and Proverbs, where he says, I put you together, I know the plans I have for you to prosper you, and I have prepared good works in advance for you to do. These are all the big picture things God has. As we live large by living in the moment, by being the
By
salt in
living
the
out
fire.
the small things, because remember, it was those last three little numbers that the scientist did not put into his equation,
Right.
and he comes back and basically a little drizzle is predicted rather than a large thunderstorm.
Yeah.
So we leave out those little details of living out the daily life with God, no matter how small it might seem, and
it
all of a sudden,
creates-
it's just a little drizzle of the Holy Spirit in our life rather than a drenching downpour.
So there you have it. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We appreciate the, taking time to spend time with us. And as things are in flux, we be here again next week. Not sure what we're talking about, but we'll have more videos and more things, and we may even have more fire. Who knows? So,
Yes, our fire is still burning blue over there.
yes, says
We-
it will for 30 minutes.
Yes, we still have peace
Yes.
with our love
This-
and salt.
So great. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Again, if you ever have any thoughts or ideas or comments, just throw them in there. We like to hear from people, and we reply to everything we hear. And we hope you have an awesome rest of your Sabbath day, and we'll see you next week.